Hi, my name is Bente, I'm the Norse Witch, and in today's video we are going to be talking about incense. As you probably know, I am a big fan of incense, especially loose incense. And that probably started with the time when I ran a shop, because I started making a lot of different incense blends for various, sometimes very niche things and situations, because I also made custom incense blends for people. And I realized how much I love it and how versatile it is and how fun it is to make them and how actually easy it is to make them. And since then I mentioned it a lot in videos, and a lot of you were very interested in how I personally make incense blends, my process, why I make them, what I make them for, what I use them for. So I thought, why not make a video about it? It's not really a secret anymore. I'm not selling my incense blends anymore, so why not tell you how I make them? It's not very special and it's not very hard to do. So let's talk about that today. But first of all, why should you use it, or what could you use it for? So first of all, I already mentioned incense is an insanely versatile tool, not only because there is a lot of different things that you can do with incense, but also because you can make it in a lot of different ways and even in different forms. It has been used in various different ways by various different cultures for a long time. Incense has, for example, been used as offerings to deities and spirits or to ancestors. It has also been used to accompany prayers to gods. It has been used for protection, for cleansings, for purification, blessing, for banishment also, for consecration. So it has a very long history of being used in various different ways. In general, incense has been thought of by various different cultures of being able to kind of transport something from this world into the other world. For example, a lot of people were burning incense to accompany a prayer because they thought that the act of burning the incense and the smoke of the incense will carry the prayer from this world to the other world to, for example, the deity that they were praying to. They thought that, for example, if you burned incense, because of the smoke, it would reach the other world and then reach the god or the spirit or the ancestor in question. And I personally really like that view. I kind of feel the same way about it. That's why I personally really like giving incense as offerings. But you can use it for so many different things. You can also very much use it just to accompany a ritual or a spell. So let's say you are casting a money spell. If you want to be fancy about it, you can make a specific incense blend for the goal of attracting money and then burn that while you are casting the spell. And that way you can strengthen the energies during the ritual or the spell in question. As I already mentioned, incense is not only very versatile in the way in which you can use it, but also in its form. Most people will probably know about incense sticks. That's probably the way in which most people use incense nowadays, because it's just very simple and easy to use. You take the incense stick, you stick it into some container, and then you light it and it burns, and that's about it. But it also comes, for example, as cones in different ways. Sometimes they produce smoke upwards, sometimes they produce smoke downwards, so that it kind of forms a waterfall situation. But it also, for example, comes as loose incense, which I will be talking about in this video when I'm talking about how I make incense, because I have never successfully actually made like sustainable herb and resin only incense sticks or cones. I once very successfully made farting incense cones. If you remember that, it was in one of my vlogs. That was funny, and Loki really liked those as an offering. But those contain a lot of charcoal too, and I kind of wanted to succeed in making incense sticks and cones that were only resin and herb. And I never really succeeded in that. They never really burned correctly or the way that I wanted them to. So at some point I abandoned that project. So now I'm just using loose incense, and that's what I'm best at. So that is what I'm going to be talking about in this video. I should probably mention incense in both pre-Christian Scandinavia as well as the trolldom tradition. In pre-Christian Scandinavia, we don't really have a mention of any incense situation in any primary sources. There is archaeological evidence of like charred remains of burned aromatic herbs and woods and things, especially at burial and ritual sites. So it is possible that they were burning specific aromatic things as offerings, or maybe to accompany the dead into the other world. It's possible, but of course we cannot really prove anything here. I would personally expect that they used it in some kind of form, but we don't really have any proper evidence of it. In Thraldom though, it is very much used, so I am definitely using it. And also, even if you are a heathen and you're not a Thraldom practitioner or a magical practitioner in any way, I think you can still use incense, even though we don't know for sure if the pre-Christian Scandinavians used it. It's still a great offering, so why not use it? So in short, incense is extremely versatile, it's very easy to make, at least loose incense blends. And it is also a very, very creative process. So that's also what I like about it. You can make things as specific to one very, very tiny little intention as you want, or you can keep it as broad as you want. There's really no correct way or wrong way of doing it. Hello, Skadi. And that is what I like about it. You can get extremely creative. You can do whatever you want as long as it smells as you would expect or want it to. That is fine. And of course, as long as it's not toxic. That is something that I should probably mention whenever I'm talking about anything that has to do with plants. You should definitely do your research before you put any plant that you don't know into an incense blend. Please, as always, when you're working with plants, research whether they are poisonous or toxic. Don't just throw something that you don't know into an incense blend. And also, if you have, for example, any health conditions with like breathing, like asthma or something, or if you have pets, specifically birds or cats, then definitely make sure that you are, again, researching which plants you use, and make sure that when you are burning incense, you are not burning the incense while for example, your cat is sitting right next to you. When I'm using incense, I usually burn it when the cats are not in the same room with me, and I also make sure that the windows are open so that there is ventilation happening. Just don't burn any incense when your pets are around. Something else that I really wanted to mention about incense that is not necessarily magical, or at least nowadays it's not necessarily magical, is that burning specific plants can have a physiological effect on your body and also a psychological effect on your body, and that is scientifically proven. So there are specific plants that when you burn them and you breathe in smoke of it, then it has some scientifically proven effect on your body. So for example, the smell of lavender, for example, is very calming, whereas something like peppermint, for example, or rosemary helps with focus. There are specific scientifically proven effects that a specific plant has on your body, and you can definitely use that in the process as well. So when you're making an incense blend and you want to select the plants to put into it, you don't have to necessarily just look at the energetic qualities of the plant, but also the physiological and psychological effect that the plant has on the human body. So now let's finally talk about how to make loose incense blends. As I already said, I won't be talking about incense sticks or cones, simply because I haven't really succeeded in making sustainable ones. So loose incense blends it is for now, but they are also very, very easy to make. Way easier, I think, than cones and sticks. So I think that works out pretty well. One thing that I really want to emphasize is that there is no one correct way of making loose incense blends. There are specific processes that some people use. For example, some people like to take one part of each part of a plant. So for example, one part of a flower, one part of an herb, one part of a wood, one part of a resin, and one part of a root. That is something you can do if that works for you. Some people say that that way the incense blends smell better, but I personally want to be a little bit more free with what I'm doing, because especially when you are deciding which part of a plant you use, that can alter the energies that this incense blend produces, because different parts of herbs have different qualities to them. So I want to be more free in what I'm choosing. So I'm not going by any specific process, I'm doing it more intuitively. Also, incense blends don't always have to smell good. A lot of people think that that is the goal, but I think that that is really only the goal if you use it like recreationally to have something smell good in your house. Then of course the incense should smell good. But if your goal is something different, if your goal is for it to be protective, or if your goal is to make like a more magical incense blend, then it doesn't necessarily have to smell good. When I'm personally making incense that is an offering to the gods, then I like it to smell good because I would want my offering to smell good. But for example, things like banishing incense blends and protection incense blends, those make a lot of sense to not smell good, especially banishing incense blends. Typical herbs and plants that are seen as being banishing are usually ones that smell bad or very pungent. Something like, for example, valerian, or specifically valerian root, or something like garlic, you know, those very pungent smells that don't necessarily smell good. They definitely give the effect that you want. You want something to go away, and if you want something to go away, then why would you make a very sweet smelling incense? So the point that I want to make here is your incense doesn't have to smell good. It has to have the effect that you want it to have. And if the effect is not necessarily to sweeten someone or to attract something, then it doesn't necessarily have to smell great. All right, so with that being said, let's talk about my process of making loose incense blends. Of course, the first thing that we should think about is the intention of the incense blend. Is this an offering to a god or a goddess? If yes, which one? Is this a magical incense blend? For example, a cleansing or a protection incense blend, banishing? Is this something to attract money, to attract peace? Is it maybe an incense blend to accompany you while you are meditating? Should this maybe heighten your psychic senses or maybe help you go into a trance? What specifically is your intention for this incense blend? This is the first thing that you should think about, and this is probably the most important part because you really have to know for sure what you want to accomplish with this. If you can't do that, then how are you supposed to select the plants that go into the blend? Because then after you have successfully decided on a very specific intention for your incense blend, we are going to be thinking about the plants and also the parts of the plants that are going into the incense blend. We are not only doing that by, for example, the energetic qualities of the plant, so your associations with it, the planetary correspondences that you think a plant has, or also the part of the plant has, because a lot of the times different parts of the plant, so for example the flower versus the root, have different associations. So think about that. Think about the energetic associations of the plants and also the different parts of the plant. But then also think about how the plant smells. Is it more sweet smelling or is it more refreshing? Is it more like woodsy, earthy? That could be different to what your correspondences for the plant are. And then also think about the physiological and psychological effect that the plant has on the human body. So you can also go at it from a more scientific side. You don't necessarily have to go only by correspondences, but also you can go by smell and then the scientifically proven effect that the plant has on the body. If you're making an incense blend for a magical intention, like let's say attracting money or cleansing or something like that, then you probably also have like an idea for plants that you could use for it. But if you are making an incense blend for a god or a goddess or a spirit, for example, this can prove a little bit more complicated. There is not necessarily always plants that are known to be connected to a deity or specifically a spirit, depending on how much is known about a god or a goddess and how long you have been working with them or worshipping them. You will know more or less about which plants you want to use. When talking about gods and goddesses, I usually go about it in a way where I think about what this god or a goddess is about. So for example, if I think about Freya, then I think about fertility and sex and badassery and self-confidence. And then I think, okay, which plants and which parts of the plants would I personally associate with these attributes, with these qualities? Or also which smells do I associate with that deity, qualities, and then the plants that also have these qualities. This is kind of the connecting factor here. That makes it way easier to make an incense blend for a god or a goddess, and you can do the same thing with a spirit. So if you think about your house spirit, what is that house spirit like? Is it more assertive or is it more shy? You know, things like that. And then of course you can always just directly ask the spirit or the deity in question what they would like in their incense. You don't necessarily have to guess or do it by intuition. There is always the possibility of asking them directly and then using the plants that they told you to use. Next up, of course, we have to get hold of these plants. It is of course optional, but I always say it is the best to gather these plants yourself, so you can go out foraging and then gather the plants and the specific parts of the plants that you need. This will not always be possible because, of course, if you want to use some plants that don't grow around you, you can't do that. If you're in the middle of winter and it's a flower that you want, well, probably also not possible. So depending on if you need the incense blend right now or if it's okay to take a little bit longer to make, depending on all of that, also of course on your ability, maybe it's just not possible for you to go foraging. It depends. Of course, it's always nice to gather the plants yourself because then, as I already mentioned in my leveling up your foraging game video, it's always great to gather your plants yourself because then there is an even deeper kind of level of associations and of intention that you can add to the incense blend. So if you can do it, that's great. I would always say, if you can forage yourself, then do it. But if you can't, it's also totally fine to just buy the herbs from a trusted source. Would of course be the best if the plants are grown organically, if you know the source, if you know that they are growing them in a sustainable way, that everyone is paid a fair wage, you know, the usual. Make sure that the shop you're getting the plants from is a very ethical shop and that they are doing everything in a sustainable way. Of course, if you are gathering the plants yourself, you should first of all dry them. This can take more or less time depending on the parts of the plants that you use. If you're just using herbs or flowers, then this will be faster. If you are using roots, for example, or woods, this will of course take a much longer time. But definitely make sure that the parts of the plants you are using are dried completely, because otherwise this could inhibit the incense from properly burning if it's still wet inside. And also this could lead to molding, of course. If you put something wet into a container later on that is sealed basically, then of course this could mold. So just make sure that if you are gathering the plants yourself, you are letting them dry completely. And then also you want them to be small. You want to grind them down. It doesn't necessarily have to become a powder. I personally really like to still be able to see a little bit of the plants that I used. So I do not grind my incense down into a powder, but it has to be small enough to mix properly. Because what you don't want is that chunks are so big that you're basically not burning all of the plants at the same time, but only one or two, you know? You want everything to be burning in the right mix. So they have to be small enough to mix properly. So now we have the components of our resulting incense blend. Then what I do is I take each potential part of the incense blend and I burn them by themselves. So I take one plant that I gathered or that I bought and I burn it, and then I note both what it smells like and also which effect it has on me energetically and also physiologically, psychologically. Does it make me calm? Does it give me energy? Does it help me focus? What effect does it have on me? And also, what does it smell like? And I do that with every single component. And then you have basically a big list of associations and qualities for each of these components. You not only have the scientifically proven physiological and psychological effect it has on the human body in general. You not only have the energetic associations and the correspondences, you have the smell, you have what it does to you specifically, you have what it does to you energetically. So you have a lot of different qualities for this plant. And from this list, you can basically just pick whichever ones you feel like suit your intention most. If this is an incense blend that is supposed to get me into a trance, then of course I want an incense blend that helps me, for example, calm down and that helps me focus. Whereas I don't necessarily want a plant in this incense blend that makes me very energetic, that makes me want to move. So depending on what the incense blend is for, you should of course focus on different things. And then from there, it's really just a very creative process. I usually go down a very simple route. Once I have really figured out, okay, I want this, and this component, I am just throwing them into a one-on-one mixture. So I take equal parts of every component, put them into a mix and burn them. And I smell the resulting blend. And again, I note what it smells like. Does it smell the way that I want it to smell? And I note which effect it has on me. and if that is what I wanted. And then I tweak it. It's possible that equal parts are already perfect and then you are done. Nice. You can put it into a glass container or whatever container you want and use it. But sometimes you have to tweak it a little bit. Sometimes you realize, okay, there is too much of this component that is maybe very sweet smelling. I wanted less sweet smelling. Then I would choose one of the other components that doesn't smell as sweetly and add more of this component and again, burn it and then see whether this is better. This is a very, very creative process that can take from very, very little time to a long time, depending on, of course, how perfectionistic you are, but also depending on how much experience you have. Because of course, if you use these plants for the first time in incense, you have to figure everything out while you're doing it. But the more incense blends you make, the more you're already aware about the effect of the plants, the smell of the plants, and then you already know, okay, I need more of this and less of that. And then of course it will go down quicker. But this is very, very creative and you're just mixing things together, adding more things to figure out the perfect mix. And then, well, once you have done that, you have the perfect mix, the perfect incense blend, then of course either you're already done or you could enchant it if you want. You don't necessarily have to do that, but depending on what really the goal of this incense blend is, what you want to use it for, it could be beneficial to enchant it. So for example, if you want to use it in spell work, then enchanting it could make sense. If you want to use it as an offering to a specific god or goddess, then maybe it would make sense to consecrate it, for example. It always depends on what this incense blend is for and what you like to do. So yeah, that is my process of making incense blends. It is very free-flowing, very intuitive, but for me it works really well. And again, the more experience you have, the faster this will go down. Questions I get asked quite a lot is also, how do I even burn loose incense blends? Because if you've never done it, then maybe you are not aware. There are basically two ways that I use to burn loose incense, and that is either I use a heat-proof container, something like a cauldron or just like a metal bowl or something. I fill that with sand, with a good amount of sand. You don't just want like a millimeter of sand on the bottom, you want a thick layer of sand because this is supposed to kind of block out the heat. And then you put a disc of charcoal on top of it. I usually use self-burning charcoal because it's just simpler. You don't necessarily have to do that. So I light a disc of charcoal, put it onto the sand, and then I let it burn a little bit. I let it get hot. And then I just add the mixture. And then it usually burns pretty quickly because this charcoal gets very, very hot. If you want it to burn less quickly, you can add a little bit of sand on top of the charcoal and then add the incense onto that. But if you want, for example, a lot of smoke, a lot of power, and a lot of heat, because sometimes you want that depending on the intention of your incense blend, a lot of heat, a lot of fire can help. If you want that, then of course feel free to add the incense blend directly onto the charcoal, but then of course it burns quicker, so it's possible that you have to reapply more and more of the incense blend onto the charcoal. Also, depending on the components and the plants that you used in the incense blend, some don't necessarily smell right if they get as hot as they do on charcoal. And that is why I sometimes use option 2. And that is also usually the renter-friendlier option because it produces less smoke. And that option is to use a tea light candle, and then you have some kind of sieve on top. And you put the incense blend on top of the sieve so that the heat of the tea light candle kind of slowly smolders the plants. That way they don't get nearly as hot as they do on charcoal, so they take much longer to burn. They usually produce less smoke. Otherwise, it's also, I think, a little bit more pet friendly and like asthma friendly. And it's also better for some components of plants. Things that are more like hard, like resins, woods, roots, something like that, they can stand a lot of heat, so those are usually better to burn on charcoal. But if your blend is very floral heavy, those usually don't smell as nicely when you burn them on charcoal because they are very light and flimsy, and those parts like herbs and flowers, they smell much better if you burn them over a tea light candle because they don't get as hot. So depending on the incense blend, you can choose whichever you like, and also depending on how much heat you want in the effect of the incense. And then I also got asked about alternatives for incense. I already mentioned that some people, because of their health, can't really use incense, or because they, for example, live in a very, very small flat with, for example, cats or birds or other pets, so they can't really burn incense because they don't have like a separate room to put their pets in while they are burning the incense. And in those situations, yeah, incense isn't the best idea probably. But there are alternatives. They're of course not the same thing, but they can have a similar effect. One of them is simmer pots, for example. Of course, this is energetically a little bit different because you are bringing in the aspect of the water element that can work in your favor depending on the intention behind it, but it could also be something that you don't want. I think you could also potentially use like some potpourri, so just like a mixture of very, very heavily scented flowers and herbs that you put like into a little bowl or something, so they just fill the room with the smell. But of course, this doesn't really work with like resins and roots and things like that. And I think depending on how heavy, for example, your asthma is, and depending on the pets that you have, I think you can also use an essential oil diffuser. Also, again, a little bit different, but if you need an alternative, maybe that is one. And with that being said, that is everything that I have for you today. I hope that you liked the video. If you have any further questions, put them in the comments and I will try to answer them. If you did like the video, make sure to subscribe and give a thumbs up and ring the bell down below so that you're notified whenever I upload a new video. Feel free to check out my Instagram. And if you want to support this channel, then make sure to check out my Patreon or my YouTube membership. And I will see you in another video. Bye!